Mysterious and gloomy places where life once boiled and now only silence and dust remain. Today we go on an amazing journey around the world to learn about cities where time seems to have stood still. Get ready to immerse yourself in the atmosphere of unknown and mysterious places where nature gradually takes its toll. Welcome to our top 10 ghost towns. Craco, Italy. Surrounded by picturesque cereal fields and olive groves, the town is a single sculptural composition of closely built houses nested on a limestone cliff. Above the vaulted alleys and steep staircases rises the silhouette of a Norman tower and a 13th century castle. From a distance, it seems as if all this is just one big mountain. The colors of the houses, churches, and fortifications are identical to the natural coloring of the rocks on which the settlement is located. Founded in the 8th century, having survived plague epidemics and raids by robbers and marauders, this city was eventually abandoned. The city is located at an altitude of 400 meters, and the panoramic view allowed residents to notice the approaching enemy in time. But despite its advantages, Craco was exposed to the elements. One terrible day in 1963, an underground shock of unprecedented force shook the rock, causing many casualties and destruction. It became truly unsafe to stay in the houses, and it was after this event that people chose to move to the neighboring settlement of Craco Italy, and their former homes were completely taken over by nature. Lago, Epecuén, Argentina. A once thriving, cozy resort town has become, in every sense, rock bottom. The so-called Argentine Atlantis has been underwater for more than 20 years. Only recently the waters receded, revealing a post-apocalyptic landscape. Dead gnarled trees and ruins of houses, rising like rotten, sharp teeth from the ground, abundantly strewn with garbage. Today, in place of streets and parks, there is only dead land, depleted of salt water. But once upon a time, it was wonderful here, say old-timers. The tourist town of Lago Epecuén was founded in 1920 on the shores of the Argentine salt lake Epecuén. There were more than enough tourists who wanted to take salt baths. The town grew rich and expanded, and in the 50s, numerous buses and trains brought people here from all corners of the country. The town turned into a flooded and abandoned place unexpectedly and quickly. In November 1985, after long and heavy rains, the lake was filled with rainwater. The water level reached a critical point, and the dam could not withstand it. After that, Lago Epecuén began to sink underwater. Luckily, there were no casualties, but the residents had to leave the cozy town. Despite all efforts, it was not possible to save it. By 1993, the entire town was submerged under 10 meters of water. And in 2009, the flooded village had its first and so far only resident, Pablo Novak. He became a hero throughout Argentina after a short film called Villa Pablo was made about him. The elderly man is trying to prove to the world that even after the disaster, it is possible to live in his hometown. The ghost town of Bodie is located in the western United States, in California's Mono County on the border with Nevada. Its history began in 1859 when a certain William S. Bodie discovered a large gold deposit in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Bodie never learned the truth about the town being named after him because he froze to death during a snowstorm that same year. In 1880, 10,000 people already lived here, for whom several dozen salons, 7 breweries, a railway station, and a red light district worked. In addition to churches, a Taoist temple was opened in the city, which was located in the Chinese Quarter. Of course, the times of the gold rush were not calm, so in Bodie, every day there were all sorts of criminal incidents, from stagecoach robberies to murders. But all this did not last long. Gold mining became less profitable due to the fall in world prices. The city gradually emptied. By 1900, there were fewer than 1,000 people left, many of whom left in 1917 before the railroad was dismantled. In 1932, a fire destroyed many of the town's administrative buildings. Even the post office closed 10 years later. Gold mining continued until the mid-1960s, but prospectors came from other towns. In 1962, the town turned into a kind of open-air museum, the Bodie State Historical Park of California. About 170 buildings have been preserved here, including a church, a school, a saloon, a store, and many residential buildings. When leaving the town, the residents of Bodie left many things behind. Furniture, kitchen utensils, clothes, paintings, cosmetics. All of this has survived to this day. Even the store shelves still have goods on them. Plymouth, Montserrat. In the mid-1990s, the local Soufriere Hills volcano, which had been dormant for 400 years, decided it was time to wake up, and the people living on its slopes were in trouble. At first, the Montserratians were lucky. The volcano's activity was relatively weak, and its various manifestations were directed away from populated areas. For about another year, local residents managed to lead a more or less normal life, but an escalation of events was inevitable. In May 1997, the government ordered the population to stop all agricultural activity on the slopes of the Soufriere Hills and to be prepared for immediate evacuation. On June 25, 1997, at 12:55 p.m., the volcano exploded. The ash column rose to a height of 12 kilometers, and powerful pyroclastic flows rushed down the mountain slopes. About 200 houses in 7 neighboring villages were seriously damaged or completely destroyed, as a result of which 19 people died. Mostly farmers who ignored the administration's demands to stop work in the vicinity of the volcano. More than 70% of the island's residents left, and the capital, Plymouth, turned into a real ghost town with empty streets and abandoned houses. The Japanese village of Nagoro is considered one of the most terrifying places on Earth. The reason for this is the unusual local inhabitants, dolls of which there are 10 times more in Nagoro than people. Many residents of Nagoro left their homes in search of work, others died over time. Local artist Tsukimi Ayono returned home to Nagoro, but she felt lonely. She dreamed of people returning to the village. Now the village population doesn't decrease because whenever a local dies, Ayono sews a doll to fill the gap left by the departed person. Currently, the doll population of Nagoro is 10 times greater than the human population. These dolls look like scarecrows and can be found anywhere. Behind school desks, in the city center, inside the town hall, and anywhere else. Tsukimi came up with the idea 15 years ago. At that time, she sewed a doll and dressed it in her father's clothes. She placed the doll in the garden to scare away birds. Nowadays, many people refuse to go near Nagoro, considering it one of the creepiest places on the planet. Ordos, China. You probably haven't heard of these huge deserted megalopolises, which in China are called Epecuén. Perhaps the most famous Chinese ghost town is Ordos. The coal industry center was decided to be radically expanded in 2004, and a suburb designed for 1 million residents was quickly built. In the first 8 years alone, the population of Ordos was only 30,000 people. And if you also imagine what part of them were people serving the city, then it is clear that only a few wanted to go to Ordos. In order to encourage people to settle in Ordos, the Chinese government recently took an unconventional step. It moved some of the major universities to Kanbashi, Ordos region. And since, according to the law, in order to send a child to a university or school, you need to have real estate nearby, then willy-nilly, parents were forced to buy apartments and move here. Now, judging by the information of people who have been there, the situation in the suburbs has become better, city dwellers have appeared, but the city center itself is completely empty. Centralia, USA. The history of the small town of Centralia, which became the prototype for the city from the film of the same name Silent Hill, begins in the mid-19th century, when the state of Pennsylvania became famous due to its vast deposits of minerals and coal, capable of satisfying most of the needs of the U.S. economy. In May 1962, the Centralia City Council decided to send 5 volunteer firefighters to clean up a garbage dump located in an abandoned mine shaft near the cemetery. As they had done before, the firefighters set the garbage on fire and waited for it to burn out, then put it out. Because the fire had spread much deeper, the piles of rubbish began to smolder, then the fire spread to coal deposits, and then to neighboring mines. All attempts to extinguish the raging underground fire were in vain. The true scale of the disaster was assessed by residents in the late 70s, when the owner of a gas station inserted a dipstick into an underground tank to check the fuel level and pulled it out, burning his hands. The temperature of the gasoline was 78 degrees Celsius. The ground began to collapse all over the city. It was especially scary when the night silence was torn apart by a loud hissing sound, sometimes accompanied by stones and pieces of dirt falling on the roof. The ground was simply torn apart by the high pressure of gas and steam from the burning coal. That is how the city was covered with cracks. Only in 1984, when the city began to drown in smoke and fire from underground began to burst into houses, Congress allocated $42 million to organize the resettlement of citizens, which predicted the existence of the city. According to scientists' calculations, there is enough anthracite coal for another 200 years of burning. When most of the families left Centralia, a large-scale cleanup of the city began. All the houses that burned or remained empty began to be torn down. Thus, in this place now, there is only a grid of roads in the past streets and a couple of buildings. Hutuwan, China. The village of Hutuwan on the Shaanxi Islands was founded in the 1980s. At that time, it was inhabited by about 2,000 people, all of whom were workers in the fishing industry and their families. The location for the village was not chosen by chance. There were a lot of fish in the local waters, which were easy to catch and sell for good money. Things were going well, and the settlement even had a port built for fishing boats and cargo ships that delivered fish from the island to the mainland. Unfortunately, by the early 1990s, everything had changed dramatically. Within a decade, fishermen had caught almost all the fish, and in general, its price in the markets of Chinese Shanghai had dropped significantly. Fishing in the archipelago stopped bringing in money, which is why people began leaving the village of Hutuwan en masse. At one point, the village's population was only 30 people, which is why the Chinese authorities closed the transport routes to the settlement. This was the last straw. Having lost contact with civilization, even the most devoted residents left the village. Thus, in the once lively village of Hutuwan, shops stopped working, a small hospital and other establishments were closed. Even the houses were empty. There was nothing valuable left inside. Wild animals like rodents and snakes gradually began to penetrate the village, and birds began to build nests. The walls of almost all the buildings were covered with climbing plants like ivy and grapes. All this worked as an excellent camouflage, and at the moment the village of Hutuwan is very difficult to spot even from a helicopter. The town of Wittenoom in Western Australia has a bad reputation. For several decades, entry and stay in the town have been strictly prohibited by local authorities. The town of 20,000 residents was built in 1930. Wittenoom's economy was based on the extraction and processing of asbestos. At that time, nothing was known about its carcinogenic properties. The town existed for more than 30 years. During this time, dust from asbestos mining contaminated all the surrounding areas. Every corner of the city was saturated with it. In total, dust settled on 50,000 hectares. Over time, the concentration of toxic substances in the soil and air became so great that mass diseases began in the city. In total, during the last period of Wittenoom's existence, 2,000 people, or every 10th resident, suffered from pleurisy and lung cancer associated with asbestos toxins. People began to leave Wittenoom little by little, but in 1966, the authorities decided to close the city entirely and resettle everyone from it. Since then, Wittenoom has been a forbidden territory, with authorities constantly warning that it is mortally dangerous to be there. Asbestos has mixed with the soil and water. Toxic substances are released into the air, and their concentration is uneven. Somewhere, a person can suffer mild, delayed harm, which he or she will only learn about several years later. But if you find yourself in a place saturated with toxic asbestos dust, you can suffer immediately. At present, only a few buildings and paved roads, former streets of Wittenoom, remain from the city. Hashima, Japan, also known as Cruiser Island, is the most famous of Nagasaki's uninhabited islands. About 1,300 convict laborers died there last century, but new inhabitants have since appeared, perhaps drawn by the place's dark history. From 1930 until shortly after World War II, thousands of Korean and Chinese convicts were forced to work on the Pacific island of Hashima in the East China Sea. Some never escaped. It was discovered in 1887 and was used as an important coal mine after it was acquired by Mitsubishi in 1890. The tall concrete buildings were built in 1916 by Korean and Chinese prisoners, who had to work in grueling conditions. About 1,300 workers died on Hashima during underground accidents, from exhaustion or malnutrition. Those who managed to survive called the island not Hashima, but Prison Island, or Hell Island. After the war, many ordinary citizens moved there for work, with about 1.5 meters of living space per person. During the boom period, when the 480 by 160 meter island became the nation's coal mining center, it was home to 5,300 people, with hospitals, schools, shops, and even a cemetery. But soon the coal in the mines ran out. In 1974, they were closed, and the island was abandoned, and nature began to restore the original landscape. The concrete buildings, which were previously considered strong enough to protect the island's inhabitants from typhoons, began to fall apart.